joining us for a new edition. I'm Nadia Sharbi, and this week we're putting the focus on how France uses its exceptional cultural assets as a political tool, both domestically and abroad. And you join us outside the unmistakable Pompidou Centre in the heart of Paris, a rare and controversially modern addition to Paris's famed Haussmann skyline. Completed in the 1970s, Europe's largest modern art museum takes its name from the man who commissioned it, President Georges-Pompidou. But more on that later. Let's start with a look at Paris's most important cultural centres and their presidential contractors.
François Mitterrand erected so many landmark buildings and monuments during his 14 years in power. They called him the building president. He's behind the Great Arc Business Centre and the glass pyramid in the middle of the Louvre. He ordered the construction of the Bastille Opera and a library shaped as 4 open books carrying his name. Several of these projects created controversies, at least at first, but most are now a key part of the Paris landscape.
We got insulted so many times, but we resisted. We knew we would take these projects to the end and that one day people would love it and approve our choice.
The president would have liked to live on to see the buildings he imagined and to see what kind of footprint he's left. François Mitterrand was obsessed by cultural legacy and what he would leave behind.
When Mitterrand was in power, the Orsay train station was turned into a museum housing impressionist masterpieces. The project was initiated years earlier by his predecessor, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who also planned the opening of the Arab World Institute.
The idea of transforming the train station this way came during Pompidou's presidency. Mr. Giscard d'Estaing then planned out the project. He injected money into it and decided when to open the museum. For me, the goal was to continue the project, and that's what I've done. It's a beautiful example of aesthetic continuity.
A project driven by former President Georges-Pompidou, the Pompidou Centre, built in the heart of Paris in place of a run-down parking lot, has had its share of criticism.
It will never be as good as what a great architect could have done, like Wright, who made the Guggenheim in New York.
It's a box, a prison, where you do experiments on rabbits.
Mitterrand's successor, Jacques Chirac, was inspired by mainly First Nations and Indigenous art. He created the Quai Branly Museum dedicated to them. Chirac inaugurated it before leaving office.
These art pieces are a one-of-a-kind visual experience, as well as an essential lesson on humanity. There is no hierarchy, not between cultures or between peoples.
The most recent presidents, Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande, have ordered no major cultural sites, mainly because these projects are now deemed too expensive for a country that needs to cut its deficits.
Well, back here at the Pompidou Centre, I'm joined by the museum's president, Serge Lesvigne. Hello, thank you very much for being with us.
Bonjour.
Now, in a way, the idea of such a multicultural complex as this one took hold with France's first Minister of Cultural Affairs, André Malraux, who was a great advocate of combining politics and culture. Was that a very French idea?
Yes, I think the Pompidou Centre is a direct legacy of Malraux's vision. In fact, its full name is the National Centre for Art and Culture, which is very close to Malraux's vision. What is different is that the Pompidou Centre is truly dedicated to contemporary art. So it's the spirit of Malraux combined with President Georges-Pompidou's interest in contemporary art.
And is it surprising that a conservative leader like Georges-Pompidou decided to create a modern art museum?
Yes, but there are 2 explanations for that. Firstly, Georges-Pompidou, and I'm talking about the man here, not the president, discovered and experienced contemporary art when he first arrived in Paris, and it caught his imagination. He also met his wife, Claude, who was equally passionate about the subject and fueled his interest further. Theirs really was a joint love affair with contemporary art. Secondly, Pompidou was both a conservative president as regards to moral issues and a modern president when when it came to development. He felt that culture was as important to a country's development as our industry or the economy. And to him, contemporary art was especially relevant because it was about the element of surprise, discovery, an openness towards the weird and wonderful, the disturbing and the unknown. And he felt that broad-mindedness was vital in helping develop a nation's spirit. And I believe that's very relevant today too.
I'm also thinking about the fact that the centre was designed by 2 Italians and 1 British architect. Is that significant politically?
Yes, it was the first time ever that France organised an international competition for the design of an important national edifice. Hundreds of architects took part, and what's great about this story is that the winning project was chosen by the jury in a secret ballot, and the 2 youngest architects came out on top, Piano and Rogers. The press went to pieces, having no idea who these 2 people were, desperately looking for information. And when the mock-up of the chosen design was brought to President Pompidou, he saw it and said, "Wow, there's going to be an uproar." But that's good.
Now, as we've heard, perhaps because it's a 2-mandate and perhaps a 2-president job, both President Hollande and Sarkozy haven't left a great Parisian monument to culture as part of their mandate. But they did preside over the decentralisation of culture with the Louvre-Lens Museum or the Mucem in Marseille. Is that something that also the Centre Pompidou is involved in?
Yes, the Pompidou Centre, along with local authorities and partners, participated in the creation of the Pompidou Metz Museum. And that's been a really great success. It's the only example of such a large-scale structure for contemporary art outside Paris, and it has 300,000 visitors a year.
So what would you say is the future of culture now?
For the Pompidou Centre, I'd say the future is about opening up to the world. What I mean by that is that museums used to be seen as a sort of closed-off sanctuary, protected from any social issues, and that now we need to turn that on its head and knock down all the barriers that come between our cultural centres and society. I think a museum, a cultural institution, has to be used as a means to help society be more open-minded, more understanding, better able to accept others, outsiders and their differences.
Serge Lesbine, thank you very much for having spoken to us.
Avec grand plaisir.
For France's latest museums, the emphasis has very much been on using art as a tool for diplomacy and cultural exchange, from the Arab World Institute here in Paris to the Museum of European and Mediterranean Civilizations in Marseille. In parallel, France has renewed with its long-standing tradition of exporting and lending parts of its extensive art collection. In fact, the Pompidou Centre has opened up branches in Malaga and Brussels and is now preparing to take on Shanghai in an effective and lucrative example of soft power.
Emperor Akihito and his wife take in Claude Monet's Effects of Fog. Tokyo, Fukuoka, Kyoto and Niigata. For 1 year, the Marmottan Museum lent its most beautiful pieces to Japan. In 2015, the Pompidou Centre opened its doors in Malaga. In just 18 months, the centre drew in more than 320,000 visitors, making €1.5 million in ticket sales. But France's most impressive undertaking can be found in the desert in Abu Dhabi. The Louvre has loaned its name to the colossal project in the United Arab Emirates for 30 years, in exchange for €400 million. That's on top of €190 million that'll go to 13 French museums lending pieces to the exhibitions, and just under €200 million for the curators who will train the Emirates teams.
We are a country that has developed arts on a national scale, and at the same time we have wanted to make these values universal. Our heritage in art crosses borders, and that's why the United Arab Emirates wanted the Louvre's name.
Using culture as a tool of influence is not new. For centuries, the kings of France encouraged the arts, so as to decorate their palaces, but also to charm their allies and impress their enemies. After the French Revolution, the state pulled away from the arts, but culture continues to go hand in hand with diplomacy. During the First World War, countries used art as a propaganda tool. Since then, France has put organizations in place to promote its ideas, like l'Institut Français, created in 2010.
Very quickly, countries felt they had to show what they were capable of producing, not just in the technical field, but also in the artistic field, which created this tradition of world fairs. Our policy goes back centuries and has been widely imitated. The Chinese, for example, recently developed something similar so that they too can spread their influence via culture.
With 98 French institutes or Institut Français, 137 embassy branches, and more than 800 Alliances Françaises around the world, France has the most internationally developed cultural network. Among its successes are the cultural exchanges, organised every year in a different country. For 6 months this year, Colombia is in the spotlight in France, while France is in focus for 6 months in Colombia.
Well, that's where we're leaving this edition. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to France 24.